Okay, let's dive right into this explainer with a quote that completely flips the script on what you'd expect from a blood-soaked Viking epic. You have no enemies. I mean, just 5 simple words, right? But they form the absolute philosophical heartbeat of the story we're looking at today. It's a statement that sounds kind of absurd when you drop it right into the middle of a medieval battlefield, yet it becomes the ultimate destination for one of the most compelling character arcs in modern storytelling. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're unpacking Makoto Yukimura's masterful manga and anime series Vinland Saga to see how a story that's so deeply grounded in brutal historical violence is actually, well, it's a profound manifesto on pacifism and mental health. We're going to look at how a series ostensibly about Vikings actually serves as this incredible mirror for modern trauma recovery, and how it totally redefines what it truly means to be strong in a world that constantly demands you be ruthless. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be peeling back the narrative layers, starting with subverting the Viking epic, moving into the emptiness of revenge, defining a true warrior, healing from moral injury, and finally wrapping up with the courage of compassion. All right, Section 1, Subverting the Viking Epic, the bait and switch. So we kick things off in 1013 AD. Characters are thrust into this brutal, historical world where might makes right is literally the undeniable law of the land. The author heavily researched texts like the Saga of the Greenlanders to set the stage in a medieval Europe where raids, slavery, and murder are just treated with this chilling, matter-of-fact attitude. And let's be honest, the initial draw for a lot of viewers is exactly that, the intense, hyper-violent Viking warfare. But notice the stark contrast here between the baseline cultural cruelty of these Vikings and the radically peaceful philosophy of our protagonist's father, Thor's. The Viking norm dictates that status and honor are earned entirely by showing personal dominance and taking from the weak. But then you have Thor's. He's this legendary, terrifying warrior who actually faked his own death just to escape that toxic culture. He teaches his young son, Thorfinn, that a true warrior doesn't need a sword. He emphasizes that true strength is rooted in compassion, not conquest. In a culture that worships violence and glorifies death in battle, Thor's attitude is completely alien, and it sets up the central philosophical tension for the entire story. To really grasp this philosophical shift, we can actually map Thorfinn's life out into 4 distinct phases, tracking what is, honestly, an incredible psychological journey. We start with the war arc, where a severely traumatized Thorfinn is acting as a corrupted, revenge-driven child soldier. That eventually transitions into the slave arc, which is this period marked by a profound realization and a really desperate attempt to reclaim his lost humanity, alongside a fellow slave named Einar. Then comes the Eastern Expedition, an epic quest to gather the immense resources needed to buy freedom and redemption, which ultimately leads us right into the final Vinland arc. Here, Thorfinn seeks to establish an actual physical utopia of peace, entirely free from the seemingly endless cycle of war and slavery he was raised in. Moving on to Section 2, the emptiness of revenge, the collapse of purpose. As a child, Thorfinn witnesses his father being murdered by a cunning mercenary named Askeladd. And this just completely breaks him. He becomes entirely obsessed with vengeance, ignoring his father's peaceful teachings and, paradoxically, joining Askeladd's very own band of killers just to earn the right to a fair duel. He spends over a decade as a literal killing machine. This creates a deeply tragic irony between 2 fundamentally flawed men. You see, Askeladd's fatal flaw is believing that bad must correct bad. He secretly despises Viking culture and actually respects Thor's, but he's too foolishly bound to his own violent manipulative methods to ever escape the cycle. He tries to fight fire with fire. In stark contrast, Thorfinn's ultimate choice later in life is doing exactly what Askeladd couldn't, leaving the cycle of violence entirely, walking away from the toxic culture and flat out refusing to strike back. Because ultimately, revenge delivers answers, just not the ones you wanted. When Askeladd is suddenly killed by Prince Canute instead of Thorfinn, Thorfinn is left entirely directionless. His whole life's ambition is stolen right in front of his eyes. The violence stops, but there's no closure. There's zero satisfaction. It exposes the absolute emptiness of a life built solely on retaliation. Think about it. When the only thing keeping you alive is hatred, what happens when that hatred is suddenly taken away? Without his enemy, Thorfinn has absolutely no idea who he is, and his entire reason for existing simply collapses. Which brings us to Section 3, Defining a True Warrior, Discovering Strength in Pacifism. Following the collapse of his purpose, a broken, traumatized Thorfinn is stripped of his weapons and sold off, forced to work as a slave on a rich man named Ketil's farm.
He's plagued by these horrific night terrors, literally haunted in his dreams by the corpses of every single person he ever slaughtered. And here, in the dirt and the wheat fields, the creator poses a central question. Does it take more strength to conform to cruelty, or to stand alone in kindness? The story is constantly juxtaposing performative toughness with true strength. On Cato's farm, you see characters beating helpless thieves or killing simply to prove their manhood to their peers. But true strength? That's portrayed as the exact opposite. It's showing mercy. It's refusing to engage in violence. And most importantly, it's having the immense fortitude to face the contempt, the mockery, and the societal exclusion of an entire civilization simply because you refuse to conform to their brutal standards. Thorfinn reaches the absolute peak of his character development in what I think is one of the most viscerally powerful scenes in the entire series. To secure an audience with the now king Canute and prevent a horrific massacre on the farm, Thorfinn willingly takes a brutal, bloody beating. He absorbs 100 massive punches without raising a single hand to defend himself. With a swollen, battered face, he looks at the surrounding warriors and echoes his father's exact words, "I have no enemies at all." He finally understands the immense, agonizing discipline required to be a pacifist in a world full of monsters. Section 4. Healing from Moral Injury. Real-world psychology. Now, let's pivot for a second because Thorfinn's fictional journey serves as a fascinating, incredibly accurate mirror for modern psychological recovery. Mental health professionals who specialize in men's therapy actually point to Vinland Saga as a masterful depiction of what happens after the fight is over and an individual's identity just collapses. They point out that Thorfinn isn't just dealing with standard PTSD, he is fundamentally morally injured. And moral injury is profoundly different from fear-based trauma. It's the spiritual dissonance and a total collapse of your ethical compass. It's caused not by what was done to you, but by what you did or what you became just to survive. Thorfinn is crushed under the immense weight of the atrocities he committed as a child soldier, and his journey to heal from that specific type of internal shattering is what makes this narrative so incredibly resonant. So this leaves us with some really tangible therapeutic lessons derived from the story, which are particularly impactful for men leaving hyper-competitive environments, red pill ideologies, or trauma-driven hardness. First up, there's self-forgiveness without justification. Thorfinn gets no clean redemption for the people he killed. He simply has to accept it and start living like someone who actually wants peace. Second is rebuilding masculinity without outsourcing your worth to violence or dominance. Societal conditioning so often tells men their value is tied to their capacity for aggression or conquering, but true healing requires learning that you can be authentic, gentle, and emotionally available without being weak. And third, processing the grief of getting what you wanted. Like Thorfinn surviving the war, many people reach their ultimate obsession-fueled goal and feel nothing but emptiness, which isn't a failure, by the way. It's rather clarity finally breaking through the noise. Finally, Section 5, the courage of compassion, choosing a different path. In the final arcs of the story, Thorfinn actively applies these hard-learned lessons. He marries a runaway named Gudrid out of love, adopts an orphaned baby named Karli, and sails off to interact with the native Mi'kmaq people in Vinland. He carries the incredibly heavy burden of his past sins, not as a reason to fall into despair, but as a permanent reminder to build a hopeful, non-violent future. You see, finding peace isn't about suddenly being fixed. Thorfinn's trauma doesn't just magically vanish overnight. Instead, healing starts with choice. It's the exhausting, daily, conscious decision to simply live differently. He chooses to farm, to build, to negotiate, and to constantly actively suppress his ingrained violent reflexes. He chooses peace not because it's the easier path, but because he is completely tired of what violence turned him into. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on, straight from the philosophical core of this incredible story. What takes more strength? Giving in to the world's violence and conforming to expectations? Or choosing kindness, mercy, and peace when everyone around you views it as weakness? Vinland Saga challenges us to rethink the very definition of a warrior. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope it gives you something powerful to reflect on in your own life.